This may be one of the best years for melodic death metal since the 2000s.
That the music is going to.
So we're going to rank some of the best releases in the genre for 2022. Alright, and obviously this is not an exhaustive list of every melodic death metal album, but just some of the more notable ones here that I wanted to talk about. Let's kick things off with Persephone and Metanoia. These guys lean on definitely the more progressive side of the spectrum. Out of kind of this and another one are probably the most proggy overall releases. They've been kicking around for a long time, building up momentum. They've got quite a kind of like underground fan base, and I gotta say, I think this may be their best album so far. Like, it feels like the culmination of kind of everything they've been working on. I don't think it's perfect. I think there are some lulls in the action for me, but overall it is one of the better releases in the genre this year. So I'm actually putting this one all the way up at fantastic. Now on the flip side, let's counterbalance that with one of the albums that wasn't maybe so great this year. And I feel like most people agreed on this, even though some people were still in favor of it. Let's talk about Amon Amarth and the Great Heathen Army. So the classic Swedish Viking death metalers out here. And, you know, as I said in my Amon Amarth tier list, which you can check out, and my thoughts on the new album, I think that they've been kind of declining in quality for really a while now. Like, this and the last two albums aren't that great. I will say I liked this one better than the previous album, for sure. Maybe even a little bit better than the one before that. They're kind of close. But yeah, it just doesn't land on the same level as classics like With Odin on Our Side, or even like going earlier, The Avenger I really love, and Twilight of the Thunder God. Like, it lacks that same energy. You can kind of feel the age. Maybe the shtick is kind of wearing off. I hear they're still great live, so that's awesome. But yeah, it's okay. It's not that great. I kind of liked the Saxon collab. It seemed kind of perfect to do, and it was something different too, so I liked that. So it's not terrible, but definitely one of my least favorite Melodeath releases this year. Going back to top tier stuff though, let's go to another more progressive release on this list. So we've got the latest from Allegion. Another band too where I didn't really like the last album too much. I liked the one before that a lot, but their previous album kind of dull, kind of bland, didn't really do much for me. But they are really talented songwriters, and again, I think they may have just dropped their best album, and they really leaned into kind of the Opeth influence most of all on this one. A lot of these kind of breaks with the acoustic and the very kind of Ackerfeld sounding clean vocals, which I just think sound amazing. The production is solid, really balancing that out with the heavy and really imposing, intense parts, and kept me going all the way through too. It's quite a long album, which I complain a lot that I say an album should only be as long as it needs to be, but in this case, I think they effectively utilized pretty much every second of the, like, I want to say it's like an hour plus runtime. Very, very strong. One of my favorites of the year overall. I'm putting it up at perfection. Dropping back down a little bit here, we had the new album from Night Rage in Abyss Rising. Now these guys are interesting because they're another Swedish melodic death metal band, and they've actually been in the scene about as long, almost as long as stuff like Dark Tranquillity. Like, they're maybe not from the very beginning, but they're from that era, and just never really got the same level of respect. I've been talking about them a bit during my melodic death metal, like, first albums, second albums, tier lists, and they kind of had a little bit of a rough start, but there's also some, like, really strong albums in their catalog too, and I think this is one of them. I think it's a really solid outing, just very kind of that classic sounding early 2000s vibe with the big profound, you know, the alternations of the palm muting and the picking, that style that every metalcore band kind of stole and co-opted for their own, but with that atmosphere. It's a little middle of the road. It's a little kind of like flat in the production, I feel like. No like new surprises, but very enjoyable if you just like that classic era stuff. So I'm going to put this one at good tier. Let's also talk about one I had a lot of people requesting that I talk about, and I haven't talked about it until this video, and that's Aeternum with Heir of the Rising Suns. When this came out, and I didn't include it in my best of the month list, like this was a lot of comments on it. They're a band out of Quebec that are leaning very heavily into the symphonic elements of their sound, which is true of actually quite a few releases we're going to get into here. And to a similar degree, I'd even say as like Flesh God Apocalypse, they may even be like the most symphonic band on this list, but it doesn't overpower the great guitar work too, which is a complaint I sometimes have about bands that do that. Some really cool regional influences in the atmosphere too to mix things up. Good mix of harsh and clean vocals, and the latter actually reminding me a bit of Isan and again Opeth. Just a really grand and epic scale in terms of how the overall album plays out. I think the only thing that pulled it down a little bit for me was that the death metal growls are kind of one note and actually started to grate on me after a while, but I'm really excited to hear more from these guys. And I'm putting them kind of at the middle at great. Moving back up into another kind of symphonically tinged melodic death metal band this year, we had Defacing God with the Resurrection of Lilith. I said these guys are kind of like a mix of sort of Arch Enemy meets Rotting Christ and Dimmu Borgir, kind of like equal elements of that. The Arch Enemy particular comes through because they've got a female vocalist, and she is just like great. Super imposing, has that kind of like Angela Gossow era intensity to her. Just very, very strong front woman, and the musicianship's really strong. The riffs are great. There's a good variety and diversity in terms of each song kind of sounds a little bit different, providing different vibes. Some are more symphonic, some are a little bit more kind of classic Gothenburg sounding stuff, and just start to finish really strong, really powerful stuff. Another one I put at fantastic. Another one that might have been overlooked by some, we had ACOD with Fourth Reign over Opacities and Beyond. This is a French band that kind of leans more into sort of Black and Death style. They're like right on the verge of maybe not quite fitting on this list. Some notes of dissection though in their sound. Very dark and evil sound. Maybe the most sort of like evil sounding record on this list overall, I would probably say. And it's really, there's a lot to enjoy here. Like another one that kind of turned my head. I believe I've listened to some of ACOD's other material, and they just have always like interested me enough that I want to check them out, but they've never like blown me away. They don't have that like wow factor yet, but they still have me really intrigued. I'm going to put this one at good. Another kind of like out of nowhere release for me was Slaughter the Giant with Depravity. So this is the debut album from this Belgian band, and they really like that. They do have some of that wow factor. Like I heard the first song and I was like, holy shit, like where did these guys come from? This is pretty awesome. And it's a really interesting mix of like the Black Dahlia Murder in terms of like being fast and intense and a little bit more modernized, but also some elements of like Dark Tranquility and At the Gates, bringing in those classic pieces, and then also more of that atmospheric and symphonic element too, depending on which song. Yeah, tons and tons of great riffing here and just those classic sounding hooks. The guitar work is very impressive. The production captures that perfectly, very strong on that front. Yeah, another new band I think have real potential for a bright future. Now at the time of recording, I do feel like I need to listen to this one like a bit more to really decide like how much I love it, but every time I throw on a song, it like hits me, like slaps me in the face, like really, really strong stuff that you definitely, really check out everything on this tier list. And of course, as I keep going here, comment below which ones are your favorites, which ones did I maybe leave out. But for now, I'm putting this one at great. Okay, I've got some maybe controversial stuff on here, and I think one of those is going to be Soilwork with Overgivenheten. Now, I actually really enjoyed this album. Like, I think it's a really solid one, but the problem is, I think they set the bar too high, because that title track that opens this thing is just so good. Like, it's so strong that it makes it hard, because I'm going to talk about this on another video depending on which order I release these. But yeah, it left me kind of after that, and then the second track is pretty strong too, and that goes in a more kind of overtly progressive direction. I also had really high hopes after A Wisp of the Atlantic, which was just such a great EP, and I felt like it was kind of them transitioning into the next era of greatness, because I feel like their discography has been a little spotty, but it's been interesting to see them evolve over time. Another very fun tier list for me to do their entire discography this year. But all that said, it didn't quite live up for me. It fell short, again, relative to these other releases. Because like I said, I think you should check out every album on this list, but if I'm comparing it to some of the other stuff on here, I just don't go back to it as much. There's wide stretches where I get a little bit bored. I think there's some filler. I think it could have been shaved down and made stronger. So ultimately, I see some people agree with me, and then other people are like, what are you talking about? That's like the best melodic death metal album of the year. And that's fine. That makes the conversation more fun. But me personally, I'm going to put it at good, kind of higher up on that tier. As long as we're talking about classic bands, though, from that, like, the big Gothenburg sound, we might as well also talk about Arch Enemy with Deceivers. I think this will be another controversial one, because it's another one where I saw people either really love this thing or really kind of hated it. And I have said for a long time, did a discography tier list, said this there too, I'm more of like an Angela era stan. Like, those are my favorite albums from them, especially Wages of Sin. And none of the Elisa albums have like truly gripped me. I think there have been like glimmers of greatness. I think Elisa is a strong front woman. I think she has a really solid voice. I just think the songwriting hasn't quite been there. This album, though, it took me there. Like, I really, really liked it. I think it's Elisa's best album from this era. And I really love that they brought in some like classic heavy metal elements too, which some people might find corny and hammy, but I love that. Like, I think it differentiates it from other albums in the discography. It just makes it have that extra element where it's just different. It's something new. And I think Arch Enemy was a band that really needed to start toying with some new elements to keep things fresh, because things are getting kind of bland. So me personally, I put it up at fantastic. I really enjoyed this thing, but again, let me know down in the comments why maybe you didn't feel the same. On top of all that, we also got a new Wolfheart album, which is a band that's been kind of kicking around for the 2010s, like one of kind of the more underdogs out there. Chris Dahlberg, who does the written reviews on metaltrenches.com, he really loves these guys. They've done some albums I've really enjoyed. Their last one was a little bit more blackened, wasn't really my favorite thing, but the one before that, like, it's super folky, and that's something that's fun about them too. Every album's a little bit different. I'd say this one also leans more into that folkier side of their sound. You kind of feel that swing to it. There's sort of a sense of like grand mythos behind some of the music. There's some diversity in the vocals, there's cleans, there's different types of harsh vocals, and yeah, pretty powerful stuff. I've been up and down with it. I haven't been like in love with it, but I do think it is kind of like on that great tier where it's something I wish more people would check out. I think it's stronger than some of these other ones below it, but maybe not in my like tip-top stuff. And then one of my biggest disappointments of the year, and I hate saying it, but it is Mors Principium Est with Liberate the Unborn in Humanity. Now the issue is, like, I love this band. They're one of my favorite melodic death metal bands, one of the best Finnish melodic death metal bands. I've loved every album. I think that they're one of the most underrated bands out there. I even included them on my most underrated bands list. And the issue here is that I tend to just really hate when bands re-record their old material. Sometimes it works out. I liked that new version of Stormblast for Dimmu Borgir, but here I feel like it takes all of the best elements out of it. Like, there are certain melodies that are even like slightly changed. I feel like there's like key changes that I didn't really care for. Some of it's like, you know, it is that vibe of just when you watch the original Star Wars movies and you see the changes and you're like, oh God, I really just wish I could watch the original cut, unsullied, unchanged. And, you know, the production objectively, you could argue, is better, but I don't think it is. Like, I kind of like that the old versions, because this is a remake of actually 3 albums. They took kind of like the best songs, you could argue, from their 3 first albums and remade them and kind of mashed them up on this release. But in every case, I like the old versions better. I just think they have more raw sound to them. They have more of that like classic Melodeath Gothenburg era kind of quality to them. I just like everything about the old versions, and I don't like it when people mess with that, and I just didn't think it was necessary. 7, their last proper album, is fantastic. Highly recommend you check these guys out, but this was one of my least favorite melodic death metal albums of the year, which I did not anticipate. And then on the flip side, of course, we have the Halo Effect with Days of the Lost. If somehow you still haven't heard about this, this is a mashup of various old members of In Flames from all different eras of that band, because they've had a lot of member changes, with Michael of Dark Tranquillity, who, if you don't know, was actually the original vocalist for In Flames. And then they did like a vocalist swap with Anders to kind of fully inform what those bands would be moving forward. So it's kind of a neat thing to have these guys mashed up, and the results are just as strong as you would hope for like a super group like that, because this, just everything I love about thinking back to the 2000s, being in high school, discovering melodic death metal for the first time, hearing those classic Gothenburg albums for the first time, spending a lot of time, even like at the pool with my Discman, listening to Damage Done on repeat. This brings all that back for me. The riffs are so powerful. Michael is in top form with his vocal performance. I think it's better than the last Dark Tranquillity album, and it's at least on par with like Atoma. I think it leans more into the Dark Tranquillity sound maybe than the In Flames sound, but it is a pretty solid kind of mix of the two, and the guitar work is just chef's kiss. So good. So good. So perfection tier, and honestly, still, I gotta say, I think the best melodic death metal album of a very strong year in 2022. Y'all check out this playlist for plenty more melodic death metal related videos, and again, let me know down in the comments your thoughts. But that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.